Okay, I have the head of the GOP for the state of Colorado, Dave Williams, to help us understand what's going on in Colorado with Donald Trump, with the new Supreme Court landmark lawsuit that's going on. Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again.
So, the last time you came on, the Supreme Court had not made the decision to take up the Donald Trump ballot removal situation. Now they have. Can you give us an update on where we're at with that? I believe February 8th is the big day, but this is like a landmark case. This has never gone before the Supreme Court. And so we definitely want to get an update on what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of developments have occurred since I've been on your program last. As you pointed out, the Supreme Court has taken up the case. It's scheduled for oral arguments on February 8th. There are many deadlines prior to that for both parties to put forward their briefings in anticipation for those oral arguments. And there are also deadlines for any other interested parties to file amicus briefs, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. I believe half the states have already filed something. Many state parties from across the country have filed something. The Republican National Committee is also going to file a brief, and all of this has to be more or less done by the end of the month so that the Supreme Court justices can account for those arguments as they prepare to hear both sides argue it out in the Supreme Court.
Now, I know that 27 states attorney generals have signed on to this with those amicus briefs. Do you know, is the other side of this argument, are they having states also sign on to back them?
Yeah, we're not entirely sure if they're going to have elected attorneys general or secretaries of state help them out. We do anticipate that other dark money left groups are going to want to weigh in on this somehow. We haven't seen them yet. I'm sure they're going to get filed. The deadlines are still a little ways out, so there's time for these briefs to be developed and submitted. And as time goes on, we'll start to see sort of the battle lines drawn and how everyone's thinking. But it comes down to basically a few questions. One question is, does the 14th Amendment apply to the President of the United States? Um, our side says it doesn't. Their side says it does. Is the 14th Amendment self-executing? Their side says it does. We say it doesn't. Um, we also put forward a question on the First Amendment, whether a political party has the right to nominate who they want in line with their association rights enshrined in the First Amendment. Um, Again, their side says nope, they can't, and we say yes, we can. So those are more or less the questions that are being answered by at this moment by everyone that's filing their briefings to the justices. Uh, Whether or not those justices care about those arguments, or if they're more focused on what the official plaintiff and the respondent have to say about the matter, I couldn't tell you. But it certainly doesn't hurt. So if anyone wants to put forward an amicus brief, anyone can do it. You can file it with the Supreme Court and just follow their instructions, and you can say your piece, and maybe they'll take it into account as they make their ultimate decision.
Interesting. Okay, so we could say something to the effect of, hey, in the event that Trump could win Colorado and pick up those electorate votes, by not having the opportunity, that disenfranchises my vote in the state of Utah, or my vote in the state of Florida, something like that. That would give me standing to say this nullifies my one person, one vote right as an American citizen.
Yeah, anyone can file an amicus brief. Typically, you want to use attorneys to represent you and get that brief filed and approved and sent. But yeah, anyone in the country can file an amicus brief and make those arguments. Uh, it's an important point too. I mean, just getting back to the heart of the argument, if he's kicked off the ballot or his votes aren't counted in Colorado, that has an effect across the country in that your voting power is diminished, because that's electoral votes in the electoral college that we know for 100% won't go to Donald Trump if he's the likely nominee. And that harms you because it makes his path to victory harder in that system where we elect the president. The other thing that should be obvious to folks is that uh, other secretaries of state, like Maine, for example, followed suit with Colorado and kicked Trump off the ballot. If this thing isn't dealt with immediately, there are going to be a number of other states that are likely to do the same and use the Colorado ruling as justification. So the stakes are pretty high. If we don't get a favorable ruling from the United States Supreme Court, it not only harms Donald Trump's ability to get elected, but more importantly, it harms the very nature of our country. We're founded on the principle of self governance. And if we can't actually vote for the candidates we think are best, then we don't have free and fair elections. It's important that everyone has the right and access to a ballot so that they can submit it. But the other side of the coin is that you have to be able to vote for someone that you want to vote for. If we just give you a ballot, but then the government says, "Hey, you can only pick from these candidates," it's not a free election, and that's the danger that's being, that's threatening our country at the moment.
Yeah. I also read that many Republican states are planning to remove Joe Biden from their ballot for his dereliction of duty at the southern border if they decide to go forward. Now, this was not talked about. Republican governors, AGs, secretaries of state, they're highly agitated with the Biden administration and Joe Biden himself, but they never said we're going to remove 80 million people's right to vote for Joe Biden or against Donald Trump or against RFK Jr. That maybe in their wildest dreams they thought that or something, but to actually say it out loud or put it in a lawsuit was absolutely crazy. But here you see all of these states are saying, wait a minute, we've got to remove this guy. Most of them don't even really understand why they're doing it. It's like they just go with the flow. And that's kind of dangerous on its own. One thing that I wanted to clarify with you is so this lawsuit against Trump was shopped around to a court they believed would do really well. They have the normal court hearing, and then the judge, she says, "Okay, well, you're not guilty, but you participated in insurrection." Then Colorado's Supreme Court picks up on that, and they rule with a majority that he is an insurrectionist and that the 14th Amendment, Section 3 applies, and they decide to remove him. The Secretary of State gets on board with that. Your Secretary of State, I read, is now saying that even if the Supreme Court sides with Donald Trump and his name is kept on the ballot, that they are not going to recognize his name. They're not going to count his votes. Have you heard that? Have you read that?
Yeah, we're getting some conflicting reports, but we thought this was a possibility from the start,
Okay.
even with Trump's name being on the ballot. So when we appealed to the United States Supreme Court, we forced the Secretary of State to have to print Donald Trump's name on the ballot. And she begrudgingly announced that, like, "Hey, we have to do it because that was a part of the initial Colorado Supreme Court ruling." Well, we we're pretty smart on knowing what this corrupt Democrat Secretary of State would do, so we started talking about the possibility of, just because Trump's on the ballot doesn't mean that she's actually going to count the votes. And sure enough, she went on to, I believe, CNN or MSNBC, one of those programs, and she was asked this question, and lo and behold, she basically said, "Well, if I may not count the votes, absent an affirmative, direct ruling from the Supreme Court saying, 'Hey, you need to count the votes.'" She's leaving open the possibility that she'll not count the votes and instead segment them out and ignore them. Um, Again, the stakes are pretty high on all this. And just to get back to the first part of your question,
Okay.
yeah, the crew, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, it's a fluff name for a dark money left group.
Okay.
Uh, they're not the good guys here, at least from our perspective. They shop this around. They've financed and organized several different lawsuits across the country in places where Democrats have an advantage in the court system. That's why you saw something in Michigan, for instance, or even Minnesota. They ultimately lost those, but nevertheless, those systems have traditionally and historically been more favorable to left-leaning or Democrat causes. They came to Colorado because they made a calculation that they would do better here versus Texas, for example. Um, Part of the reason they came here was because our system is very easy to get into court, especially on these election challenges. It's also very likely that Democrats who are appointed to the bench would give a sympathetic ear towards their case, and that's what you saw play out pretty much through the whole process here in Colorado. And we offered up motions to try and get the case dismissed at the very district lowest level that it was heard for the first time. We even offered a motion that the judge should recuse herself because she had donated to an organization that wanted to hold January Sixers accountable for things that went on, or those who supported January 6 protesters hold them accountable. We pointed that out. Trump's team, and of course we agreed with it, really advanced that problematic conflict of interest. And the judge said, "Oh no, don't worry about it. I'll be unbiased and fair." The one thing I'll give credit to that judge on doing is she, I think, correctly understood that she was not probably best suited to make the ruling to kick him off. So instead, she created a situation where she would acknowledge, or not acknowledge, but agree with the petitioners that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection through their findings of fact. And the reason that's important is because in the court system, when you appeal up, it's highly unlikely that the appellate courts or those at a higher level are going to dispute the findings of fact. And by framing the debate in that regard, it forced the Colorado Supreme Court, or at least helped the Colorado Supreme Court, zero in on the most important question: should Donald Trump be kicked off the ballot? Because if he is indeed guilty of insurrection, then what do we do with the 14th Amendment that says if you're guilty of insurrection, you should be off the ballot? It really was a strategically a good, decision that was more or less a Trojan horse, right? It was a it was a Pyrrhic victory, meaning that yes, Trump won at that level because he could stay on the ballot, but it was a hollow victory because I believe she understood correctly that the Supreme Court would likely reverse the decision and kick him off if, in fact, he was guilty of insurrection. The problem with him being guilty of insurrection was that it was never proven by reasonable doubt that he was guilty by insurrection. The judge held about a 5-day bench trial where there was no jury, and evidence that was entered into the record was very skewed and biased. Most of what was discussed or put forward was nothing more than a rehashing of the January 6th committee from Congress. And of course, the judge, being who she was, bought it hook, line, and sinker, and that's what she ruled. This is all very consequential because, again, they shopped around the country the places that they thought they would have the greatest amount of success. And what some of your viewers and listeners may not know is that the Trump campaign tried to have a change of venue. They tried to have this case, when it started at the lower level, go to the federal level. And when they attempted to do that, the petitioners openly admitted, well, we don't want it here because we don't have standing in federal court. Okay. So they admitted that this isn't something that they felt they could succeed in doing at the federal court level. So they brought it to the state level, and the person who helped ensure that it would get kicked back to the state level was none other than the Secretary of State, who was chomping at the bit to kick Donald Trump off the ballot. So they orchestrated this whole thing. And I bet you if we were to put forward some freedom of information requests or open records requests, we might be able to find some evidence that shows there was some sort of coordination going on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guarantee you, you would definitely find that. Do you think this crew out of Washington D.C. do you think they genuinely believe that they can win this, or do you think that they're just hoping that the Supreme Court will lean their direction? Is this just a smear campaign against Trump to, if they can't win at the court level, at least win in the media? What are your thoughts?
I think they have a lot of different goals in mind. First and foremost, I think they just want to waste resources of their competitors. It's not cheap to actually go to court, especially appeal it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they know that. They're funded by wealthy dark money interests like George Soros. George Soros is a billionaire, if your viewers don't know that. So he's able to completely fund these kind of things, and it doesn't even he wouldn't even know that the money was spent. That's how rich he is, and how they're able to finance these things, and they can do it without having to disclose any of this to the Federal Elections Commission or any other state disclosing authority. So if you understand that, then you can figure out that they have unlimited amounts of money, at least compared to Donald Trump or the Republican Party. They force us to waste our resources in defending him, and it makes it that much more likely that Joe Biden and his reelection campaign, along with the Democrat Party and all the parties across the country, are going to be in a better position to have more money so that they can deploy their get out the vote efforts in November of 2024. So that, I think that's goal number one for them. Goal number two is more of a Hail Mary, right? They want to be able to at least try to kick him off the ballot, because if they can get him kicked off the ballot, then hey, their number one competitor has been removed from the equation, and that would make them more likely to win in November of 2024 with the incumbent president in Joe Biden. I don't know if they actually think they can win, but through the course of doing this, it will allow them to gain negative publicity against Donald Trump, and it allows Joe Biden and the other Democrats to falsely push the narrative that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. So, those are probably what they're thinking as they advance this strategy.
Wouldn't you guess that they didn't anticipate how much this has backfired? It's actually made Trump more human, more relatable, and more popular. I mean, they're basically winning his campaign for him by giving him hundreds of millions of dollars in free advertising. Like, you've been in politics, you know how much it costs to buy airtime, and they're just giving it to him every single day, hoping that it's going to wear the people down. But the January 6th committee, with all of the money, time, and effort they spent, I read that it maybe shifted people's perspective by about 1%. So 1% changed their mind.
Yeah, I think this is a sign of how out of touch Washington insiders are, specifically the Democrats that are trying to push this insurrection narrative. They just simply don't understand that hardworking Americans, taxpayers, citizens who, they're all playing by the rules. They're trying to make ends meet. They're just not thinking about this fairyland, uh, you know, lie or narrative or story on how Donald Trump is some sort of insurrectionist who's akin to Jefferson Davis. It's just it doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test for most Americans. But when you surround yourself with folks that agree with you and get into that group think, or you're in that echo chamber, you start to make bad decisions. And ultimately, this decision to try and kick Donald Trump off the ballot, I think, is going to go down in history as one of the worst decisions the Democrats pursued. it's going to punish him. It has to. I think most Americans understand that. Look, love Donald Trump or hate him, he has every right to be on the ballot, and more importantly, every American has the right to vote for or against him. But if you start taking that right away, you're not only undermining what it means to be in America, but you're also giving credence to the argument that Donald Trump has been making ever since he's become president, that the whole system is against him, that the powers that be don't want him in Washington. You've now validated that entire narrative that Donald Trump has put forward. And I think it's absolutely true, because if no one expected him to win 2016. They thought Hillary Clinton was going to win and that this was just a novelty campaign. But the American public said, no, we're tired of the establishment. We're tired of these insiders promising us so many things and never delivering. And instead, they actually make the situation worse. So we're going to give a big middle finger to the establishment and elect Donald Trump. He gets elected, and right out the gate, as soon as he's sworn in, just resistance, constant resistance from the deep state, from bureaucrats, from his opposition, and certainly in the Democrat Party, but even from members of his own party, he got resistance. He is now able to affirmatively prove that it's all true, and this one event proves that they don't want him back in Washington, because if he gets back into Washington, then he's going to make some changes, hopefully for the better of the American public and against the special interests that dominate Washington.
Yeah. It's interesting if they want him to be seen as a Civil War era insurrectionist. You would think they would try to tie him to Jefferson Davis, but instead they keep trying to tie him to Hitler, and nobody's buying it. Nobody believes he's Hitler. I've got family members that are Democrats, and they're like, "Oh, I hate his guts, but he's not Hitler. Hitler was awful. Hitler was evil." You would think that they would try to tie him to that, but let's switch gears, Dave. I don't know if you can confirm this or not, but Representative Doug Lamborn is going to be retiring there in Colorado. I have word that you are going to seek his seat. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. Congressman Doug Lamborn shocked the political world in Colorado and resigned suddenly last week. And over the weekend, I took some time to see if it made sense for the party, if it made sense for my community, and I decided to jump in the race to succeed him. I'm running because, quite frankly, Washington D.C. is broken. There are too many say-anything politicians who will make all the promises in the world, but then when they get into power, they do the exact opposite. There are too many hardworking Americans, too many taxpayers that are relying on good leaders of good character who are going to go serve their interests, but all too often it never comes about. Uh, I think what's important for your viewers to understand is that trust in our institutions that are at an all-time low, but for good reason, right? They haven't earned our trust. They spend us into oblivion. They take away our freedoms, and they expect you to give them a pat on the back. That's not how any of this should work. This is why Oliver Anthony, right? He's the viral musician with his hit song "Richmond North of Richmond." Right? He talks about how they just want to have total control. They want to be able to know what you do and exert their influence and their power and tax you to no end, with your dollar being worthless more and more as each day passes by. If we're going to actually solve the problems of America, we need to throw the bums out who are causing the problems, and we need to put folks in who are going to solve, the very real pocketbook issues that Americans are facing. Whether it's the increase in crime that they're experiencing within their hometowns, or homelessness. I don't know about you, but if you go to any major city, it's starting to look like Hoovervilles all over the place. 10 cities where they do drugs or they engage in other crimes, and it's just unsafe for families and workers to go about and live their lives. The rising cost of goods and services, people having to spend more money to feed their families or put gas in their tank or to just enjoy, some of the simple things in life. These things are not going to be solved by the current crop of leaders in America because they haven't solved it for as long as they've been in power. Instead, they want to take your money and give it away to Ukraine, for example, right? A corrupt country where they have no accountability whatsoever. Instead of actually giving your money back to you, the taxpayer, instead of returning power back to the people, as was the whole point of our country, a federalistic system where power remains and stays closest to the people instead of it being centralized to a bunch of folks in some sort of oligarch. So yeah, I'm running because I'm fed up and I'm pissed off, and I want to make sure that our country gets back on track and starts working for the American people instead of the corrupted power brokers and special interests in Washington.
Oh man, I'm excited for you. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you for taking time away from your family to update us on the Supreme Court case. This is going to go down in history as a major decision, and hopefully it will go well, and we'll see the freedoms that America stands on continue to be there for us in the future. And again, best of luck. If people want to follow you or learn more about your campaign, what's the best way to do that, Dave?
Sure, visit my website at www.daveforcolorado.com. That's DAVEFOR Colorado.com. Or you can follow me on social media on Twitter or X now at symbol rep Dave Williams. Again, that's at symbol rep Dave Williams. Join our movement. Help us take back this country for everyday Americans, and I promise you we won't let you down.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much.